Hi, everyone. How you doing? Had some good conversation? Are we learning things? Are we going to make change? Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about the next two ladies coming out here, powerhouses, and I like to call them just straight up, well, maybe I shouldn't use that term. You know what I want to say, right? You know what I want to say. We are privileged to have two outstanding lawyers, public servants, and social justice champions who've been activating for change their entire careers. Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke oversees the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. She leads the Biden administration's broad federal civil rights enforcement efforts, and she's a former attorney for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. We just call it the Defense Fund, the Legal Defense, LDF. Letitia James, we know her as Tish James, is the 67th Attorney General for the state of New York. You see that smile on her. When elected in 2018, she became the first woman of color to hold statewide office in New York and the first woman to be elected Attorney General. Please welcome both Kristen Clarke and Tish James. Now let's give them a big round of applause. Because, I mean, these are two of the busiest, most high-profile people in the criminal justice system. Why was it important for you to show up in this moment for a message to this audience?
Thank you, Michelle, for that very gracious introduction. Racial justice and racial equity. These are the issues that keep me up at night. These are issues that are at the forefront of our agenda at the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. I appreciate the work of so many of the advocates and grassroots advocates who have assembled here and who have been doing work for years. I'm here to bring the message about the ways in which we are standing up and fighting for justice on behalf of marginalized communities. That is why I'm here today.
Madam Attorney General, you showing up for the people of the great state of New York, right?
So I'm here because I was born humble beginnings, and I've been put in this space to make a difference in the lives of others, particularly those who have been locked out of the sunshine of opportunity, and to address the issues of those who have been unheard and unseen. So serving as the Attorney General of the great state of New York, I don't take it lightly, but what I do is continue each and every day with this fire in my belly to push and push and push and push for change.
We're talking hate crimes here, and I think most of us feel as though when we know one when we see one, and we feel as though, especially either through social media, or television, or quite frankly on the streets, those incidences are becoming more pervasive. The data says so. But there's a clear definition both at the federal and the state level. So why don't we just kind of define it and define what the difference is from what we think we know is a hate crime and what actually represents one in your offices.
Yes, it is so important that we are focused on this issue right now. The latest FBI data shows that hate crimes have risen to their highest level in over a decade. Racially motivated hate crimes make up about 60% of all hate crimes, and Black people continue to be the group most frequently targeted. At the federal level, we use a law called the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act to hold perpetrators of hate accountable. What is a hate crime? A hate crime is an act of violence, an assault, a murder, a threat of violence, death threats. Those are the kinds of acts where we use this critical law, again, to hold perpetrators accountable. The law is named after Matthew Shepard and James Byrd, both of whom died 25 years ago. James Byrd, Black man, dragged to his death in Jasper, Texas. Matthew Shepard, 21-year-old college student from Wyoming, targeted and killed because he is gay. I want to say their names because it is their lives and their legacy that fuels the work that we do to fight hate crimes across our country.
Tish,
So first of all, it's important that everyone understand that It's an act of hate. It's motivated by race, gender, sexual orientation, religion. And just to put a fine print on this, all of you remember what happened in Buffalo, in East Buffalo, in a community which historically had been ignored, in a community where they did not have a supermarket. Elected officials of color in Buffalo decided to open up Top Supermarket. A young man radicalized on social media, did research, wanted to know where black people congregated the most, and went into Top Supermarket in East Buffalo and killed 10 innocent individuals simply because they were black. His manifesto was specific, intentional. He said, I'm targeting black people, and I'm going to Top Supermarket because that's where they shop. And he killed 10 innocent souls. And he was prosecuted and found guilty of a hate crime, murder, because he targeted those 10 individuals. It's important that individuals understand that social media basically radicalized this young man. And they tend to radicalize mass shooters who tend to be white men or young white men. And oftentimes it's on social medias and these platforms, which are fringe platforms, which are not moderated at all. And right now, unfortunately, there's no federal statute and or state statute which requires them to moderate their content. They do it voluntarily, and unfortunately, there's not an enforcement mechanism to make them moderate that content to address individuals who unfortunately are radicalized by this virulent social media content and posts which affect these young individuals. And so it's really critically important that individuals recognize that if you get your information from social media, you need to get your information and your facts and your news from a second means to check and verify, because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation, and a lot of hate on social media.
And I was watching one of my colleagues from CBS News, Lilia Luciano, covering the events in Israel, and she and her colleagues, our colleagues, talk about how the algorithm is such that it dumbs down, or it replaces, or it bounces out content that is factual based on legitimate news sources and amplifies, in many cases, influencers or those who have huge audiences in a way to it's frightening based on her.
And algorithms that focus particularly on young people and particularly young girls, which is why you're seeing an increase in depression and suicides and individuals who are engaging in other antisocial conduct.
So how do you pick and choose? Like in the situation of Buffalo, or any one of a number of other instances, because I'm sure as you see the rising numbers of it across all spectrums, Black, Latino, Asian, LGBTQ, religious instances, anti-Jewish, anti-Muslim, when these cases appear, one, which ones do you select? What is the strategy? And then two, how do you, in an effort not to double up your efforts, double down on your efforts?
So one of the cases that we've prosecuted at the Justice Department was the vile murder of Ahmaud Arbery, killed and targeted because he was Black and jogging down a street in Georgia. Georgia did not have a hate crimes law on the books when Ahmaud Arbery was killed. And in fact, the state prosecution handled the matter as a murder. That case did not get into the racial motivation that drove those three men to take action that led to the tragic murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And so we stepped in as the United States Department of Justice because it was important to send a message that this was not just a murder, it was a racially motivated murder. And this kind of conduct is not conduct that we can tolerate in our democracy. So that is one powerful example of why we stood in to do more than what the state was able to do. Other cases that we have brought include prosecution of the man who killed 23 people at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. We prosecuted the man who killed 11 people worshiping at a synagogue, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. These are cases that we're doing across the country because it is important for us, the United States Department of Justice, to make clear that hate crimes have no place in our society today, period.
So as I traveled over here, I received a notice from NYPD that a number of synagogues in New York City have been targeted this morning. And so that alert went out to all elected officials. And the number of anti-Semitism, the acts of anti-Semitism and the Islamophobia has gone up threefold in the city of New York in the aftermath of the events or what's happening in the Middle East. But here in New York City and in New York State, as the Attorney General, and just as my friend Sister Clark said, there will be I will not tolerate hate from anyone. And it's really critically important that we send a message out there of peace and understanding and tolerance. But here in the state of New York, there have been acts of hate. I mentioned Buffalo, but I also have to mention there are two individuals, Jacob Wall and Mr. Barnett, who basically targeted individuals, particularly black people, and to stop them from voting in 2020. He targeted them in 3 states. They targeted them in 3 states. And working with my colleague in Michigan, Attorney General Dana Nessel, and someone from Ohio, a district attorney from Ohio, we were able to get judgments against these individuals and prohibit them from engaging in certain conduct where they were sending out misinformation and disinformation to the black community and basically preventing them from voting. 2, there was an incident also in upstate New York where a ice cream store, there were members of Black Lives Matter who protested this store because they refused to hire black people. The owner took out a rifle, which we thought was a rifle, but in fact it was not a rifle, it was a BB gun, and threatened them. He was prosecuted, a civil suit. I brought a civil suit against him, and that store, as a result of all of the negative attention that they received, has now closed. There's been actions, surveillance actions against the Muslim community where we have to issue cease and desist letters. There's been actions against the LGBTQ community for simply putting on drag shows. And I see members of GAG here, and I want to thank them, Gays Against Guns. I thank them for all that they do. And for joining with me again and standing with me against individuals who basically targeted people simply because they wanted to read to children. And then there's been acts in upstate New York against the Jewish community where they've passed these ordinances and housing codes which basically discriminated against a particular group, and that's the Orthodox community that wanted to build affordable housing in certain communities in upstate New York, and Chester in particular. So my jurisdiction is civil. I work with the district attorneys in New York. We've got 62 district attorneys, and we work together. But the message is quite simple, and that is hate will not be tolerated in New York State. And if you engage in any hate, then the district attorney and the attorney general will provide recourse to all of you, either through an injunction, through an investigative process, or through seeking damages from you, which means it's going to hurt you in your pocket.
So I was told that the mission here really is of the UJC and the summit is to streamline the efforts of what you guys do so that we don't double up our efforts. It's thousands and thousands of hours that you pour into each one of these cases. Man hours and other resources that are being tagged. Is there any point at which you say, okay, Tish got this one. I'm sorry, this is so informal. It's
all right. I'm Tish.
Attorney General, Madam Attorney General, because I really don't know her well at all, but I have friends who always like, Tish James. Madam Attorney General, is there something that that you would say, okay, Madam Attorney General has taken care of it. I'm going to stand down on this one. I mean, and what instances would those be?
Absolutely. I think when it comes to hate crimes, it is fair to say that this is an all hands on deck moment. And we absolutely coordinate at the federal and state and local law enforcement levels to ensure that we are covering all of the ground. But I think the message for this audience is that there is a role for everyone to play when it comes to standing up to hate. We need to stand unified against hate. We need to make clear that none of us will tolerate targeting of people based on their race, their religion, their national origin, their gender, their disability status, their sexual orientation. We need to make clear that all people need to be able to live freely, to shop freely at a store, jog down a street, live at a home in their community without being targeted because of what they look like or where they worship or who they love. So there is a role for all of us to play. In law enforcement, we hold people accountable, but frankly, we need to make sure that we are all standing up and speaking out, reporting hate crimes when they happen, right? We can't do anything if we don't know about it. And there is a tremendous problem when it comes to underreporting of hate crimes. So we need to make sure that we are reporting hate crimes. And we need to make sure that regardless of where the hate unfolds, inside a school, on a school, in a college campus, inside of a church, that we are speaking up so that law enforcement can respond and hold perpetrators accountable.
And it's also important that everyone understand that we don't care about your immigration status, that individuals can report acts of hate against them. And so I don't ask you your political affiliation. I don't ask you whether or not you're a citizen or not. We are here to serve and to stand up and use the law both as a sword and as a shield, and to send the message that hate will not be tolerated against any particular group. And why? Because we both know and have experienced, I in particular, levels of hate. And that's why it's really critically important that I be in this position and use my voice and my authority to address those individuals who use hate as a sport.
I think it's really important, though, to kind of define this, because I think a lot of times you'll notice that perhaps the Department of Justice will choose not to prosecute a case that is high profile. And whether that was, and maybe jog my memory, if it was this administration or a former administration, it really doesn't matter. But the point is, in what instances will you make that decision not to when you've gotten a conviction or not a conviction in a state case?
So the Justice Department was founded in 1870, and a lot of people don't know this history. Some of the very first cases that the Justice Department took on were cases prosecuting the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist organizations that were using violence to stop black people from being able to vote and exercise other civil rights. So this need, this obligation, this mission to stand up to hate lies deep in the DNA of the Justice Department. And as we think about history, starting with Emmett Till, the 4 little girls killed in Birmingham, Alabama, the Charleston 9, the Buffalo 10, the Club Q shooting in Colorado, the Tree of Life 11, the Jacksonville 3 a few months ago. We have a duty and an obligation to prosecute these cases, to send a message that we will not tolerate hate in our country. Hate involves not just the victims. These are message crimes intended to send broad messages to entire communities, the LGBTQ community, Hispanics, immigrants, and others, that they don't belong in our country. And so we can't stand for that, and it's why it is one of our highest obligations at the Justice Department.
But there's nothing preventing us from working together. So obviously when she comes in, she's got the big guns. And so if I'm going to work with her collaboratively, she's going to take the lead, and I'll support her in any way. And that's what we do. And so in the Buffalo case, the federal government came in. United States Attorney in the Western District obviously prosecuted that case, along with the local district attorney. So whenever there's a case and I get a call from Ms. Clark, obviously I'm going to defer to her, work with her, support her, and do whatever I can to achieve our objective. And our objective is one thing: sweet, sweet justice.
But perhaps that's because your political points of view aligned. So I'm wondering, and so you came on board in 2018, Madam Attorney General, AAG Clark, you came on board, what, 2 years ago? It's been 2 years, 2.5 years ago. That can't, I'm sure it isn't always as streamlined, or has it been because of the offices that you hold?
I'm gonna take this one. So, no, it's not always streamlined. Let's be honest, politics matter, right? Which is why everyone's got to come out and vote next year. Amen. And particularly amongst young people, because consider the consequences if, in fact, we do not have a president who is a Democrat in office. She's gone, in all likelihood. No, she's definitely gone. And so it'll be individuals who don't believe in civil rights. They'll probably disband the office. And so it's really critically important that individuals understand the power of politics. She can't speak about it, but I can. It's the power of politics, and we have to keep, again, we've got to come out and vote. And I recognize that right now we're, young people have got a number of issues and concerns, but think about the challenges and think about the threats that certain individuals pose to our values, to our rights, and to everything that we stand for and our institutions. And if they assume power, yeah, it's gonna be a mess. And we'll turn back the clock of progress further and further and further back. And I will not have an ally in justice to go to when I need someone to assist me in prosecuting individuals for violating human rights, civil rights, and all other kind of rights in this country and in the state of New York.
AAG Clark, the point I was going to make was a point you made earlier with reference to, and you kind of like dropped the mic there for a second, Attorney General, but it's the question of whether or not going into office you had to reorganize at any point in time, and how do you sort of pull up the stakes and reorg in a timeline where there's very little time. And you also have, right now, you have moments in which you have statesmen who are walking that very fine line that you say of speaking hate speech that ultimately triggers what the AG has defined as actions of hate crimes.
Yeah. So, First Amendment, free speech, our hate crimes protections, our hate crimes laws do not criminalize speech, no matter how abhorrent, except when we're talking about speech that invokes violence, a death threat, speech that constitutes a threat of violence. Those are cases that we are prosecuting each and every day. As to the first part of your question, we are approaching this work with great urgency. From day one, fighting hate crimes has been a top priority of this administration. And for our Attorney General, Merrick Garland, his very first act on the job called on the Justice Department from A to Z to activate in the fight against hate. So we approach this work because it is urgent. There are lives on the line. There are too many lives that have been lost. And so that is how we are oriented in this fight.
So when I came in, obviously I inherited from someone who was aligned with my politics, but I wanted to expand the office, and I worked with the legislature. We now have an Office of Special Investigation in the state of New York where I investigate all deaths as a result of police interaction in the state of New York, because there is no inherent conflict between my office and law enforcement in the state of New York. 2, we have an Office of Civil Rights, which we expanded, where we investigate police incidents of violations of law, alleged violations of law. We've got a new Voting Rights Act, because unfortunately the federal government did not pass a Voting Rights Act, the George Floyd Voting Rights Act. So in the state of New York, we will have the authority to approve any changes in election law in the state of New York. It has to be subject to the Constitution and to voting rights pursuant to the state of New York. So I've been blessed, one, to work very closely with 2 legislative houses, the Speaker Carl Hastie in the Assembly, and in the State Senate, yes, clap, and in the State Senate, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, 2 people of color who now lead both houses in the state legislature in the state of New York, and they've improved and empowered and expanded my office. And so if you don't think politics matter, look at New York.
Engaging the community, how do both of your offices move in that direction?
Well, this, I think, is an example. It is important that the voices and lived experiences of communities and impacted people inform and drive our work. That is a cardinal rule about how I approach enforcement of federal civil rights laws. We travel across the country to underserved communities and have conducted listening tours in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, and more to make sure that no voice is left behind. So ensuring that we are doing work that is community-centered and trauma-informed and victim-focused, I think, is really critical to making sure that all of us, at the end of the day, have access to equal opportunity and access to the American dream.
And I do outreach, and I particularly focus on young people, because young people encourage me, and they represent hope. And they represent the future. And so there have been a number of schools that we have engaged in investigations because there have been acts of bullying and harassment against students of color, the members of the individuals who are transgender, and the list goes on and on and on, immigrants, people of color, et cetera. And we entered into basically agreements and resolutions with certain municipalities throughout the state of New York who have been engaging in this type of conduct. But I specifically want to go out and talk to young people because hate thrives in isolation. Hate thrives in isolation. And so you've got to get out there and let individuals know some of the signs, recognize that there are individuals who may need assistance, and also to identify individuals who are struggling with mental illness, which is a major, major issue. And then also, if there's any social media outlets, again, we're trying and working with the federal government to pass a law which would amend Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, because right now, platforms and these fringe platforms are immune from any liability as a result of this virulent content which is on their social media pages.
I just have to kind of stand up and say these are 2 very hardworking individuals who are now, quite frankly, I don't know how to say this, under threat, have been targeted by the enemies of, well, you can put an underline and score it however you so choose. But that one isn't easy. That one it weighs very heavily on not only your emotional, your mental, your physical being. So that said, 1, what gives you hope? What keeps your faith? What gives you motivation to continue the work? And what is your call to action? And each of you have about 20 seconds, sorry.
So what gives me hope is engaging with audience like this. I am so grateful to all of you. What gives me hope is engaging with families who have lost loved ones. That is what fuels my soul. Being in this role and having the opportunity to make sure that we are using our nation's federal civil rights laws to stand up for the marginalized, to stand up for the voiceless, to stand up for those victimized by hate, to stand up for people held in jails and prisons where there are unconstitutional conditions, to stand up for those who experience voter suppression and voting discrimination but who deserve a voice at the ballot box, to stand up for those who are subject to modern-day redlining, who aren't provided access to loans by banks and financial institutions. There is a lot of work to be done. But what gives me hope is knowing that we can get this work done together. So that's what fuels me.
So I just love all the young people who march and who have grievances against their government. But let me just say that, as everyone knows, I'm in the midst of a very historic trial. And but I've been the subject of a number of threats. And we've got to take those threats very serious. So if you ever see me, I'm usually surrounded by a number of officers. We've got to take that serious. There are individuals who are unhinged, and whenever there's communication, people act on it. But that being said, his arms are too short to box with God. Right? And I'm surrounded by angels. And there is no weapon that will form, that will prosper, that forms against me. Y'all know the verb. I didn't go to church Sunday. But the point is that I'm going to stand up and walk into that courtroom, my head up high, thinking about all of those who made it possible for me to be there. And there, no matter what he says, no matter how many names he calls me, there's nothing that he can do, because justice, my friends, is on my side.
New York Attorney General Letitia James, Assistant U.S. Attorney General Kristen Clark. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for having us. Thank you for being with us.